Welcome to Lights in the Night with your host, Russ Johnson. Uncover the truth about alien contact and hear from insiders who reveal the evidence. Stay tuned.
Introducing Pure Light, the revolutionary air purification system integrated into a special LED light bulb. Pure Light eliminates pet odors, human odors, and even mold and smoke odors with just the flip of a light switch. Guaranteed for 5 years with a 100% money-back guarantee. Transform your home or office today. Visit pure-light.com and use code RUSS, R-U-S-S, for an exclusive 20% discount. Breathe cleaner, live happier with Pure Light. pure-light.com. Promo code RUSS, R-U-S-S.
My camera. Yes. Hi. Good morning. Hi, Russ. Or good evening. Whatever. What's it called? Jim Carrey. Good morning. Good afternoon. Good evening. Thank you for listening to Lights in the Night. Today we want to cover a lot of history, and want you to really pay a lot of attention. If you need a pencil, get one, because we're going to call a lot of names and places and people who have been contactees. We have a contactee that you might have heard, Norman Maines. He's been with us a couple of programs. He really has a great history of this, and that's why we have him on, because this is an educational program, if you will. Not right. Okay, let's keep it like that. We want to keep it simple, like UFO 101. Norman, thank you very much for being with us on Lights in the Night. Let's go back. Why are you a contactee, and what do you want to talk about in terms of other contactees that you have researched and that you know about?
Russ, great to be with you. We've talked about abductions and contactees, and I have a distinction between these two, which is really an abduction is something that happens, pardon me, without people's consent, or it's an event that they didn't plan for. Contactees tend to be a delivery of information where individuals are getting educated, and a lot of times with the abductions, people may see or experience things that are unusual or extraordinary, but there's really not a big exchange of information. Contactees, on the other hand, are really getting guidance or information, or they're being educated by otherworldly beings. And I think that definitely describes my experience. The beings that contacted me brought me tremendous amounts of information. They had no interest in poking or probing or snatching me away to do anything with me other than to give me tremendous amounts of knowledge.
Right. So they commandeered you, for the lack of a better term, so that you can be a spokesperson for what's coming to the earth. Is that what that the rest of us should know? Is that what that?
That's exactly right.
Okay, good. Now you are contactee, and 1, 2, 3 about your duties, responsibilities, and what you are supposed to be doing. Billy Meyer. We go back a lot of years on Billy Meyer. You met him, or you know about him. As a contactee, what did they want him to do?
Here's what's so intriguing about the Meyer story, because it really ties into another individual that we want to discuss today, who is George Van Tassel.
Okay.
When I received information from the Pleiadians, I immediately went out and said to myself, is there anybody else who's been contacted in this way? And if they were, did they receive information? And if they did, was that information similar to what I received? And through decades of research and a lot of inquiry and a lot of study, I realized that the information that beings like the Pleiadians from the Galactic Federation of Light were giving to Meyer and giving to Van Tassel and others was exactly the same thing. The message was the same, and it's been consistent for nearly 100 years.
That's fantastic. Was George Green? You also met George Green and had a lot of conversation with him. Was he a contactee?
Absolutely, and the Pleiadians tapped him to be a publisher for their books in 1989. The Pleiadians have been working with their scribes from the mid 80s forward, and there was a big movement at that time in the 80s and 90s to contact individuals, and this is where we get the huge expansion of somewhat what some people call channeling or transmitted information, really makes an explosive debut in our popular culture and in our knowledge space in the late 80s and 90s.
All right, well, let's talk about Billy Meyer since he goes back to what, 1940. I don't know whether you know anything about William Tompkins. He was contacted back in 1941, 42, and he worked with the Palladians. Do you know much about him?
I do. And Meyer's first contact was in 1942, which is so early in this. This is 5 years before Roswell,
Okay.
the infamous Roswell incident where a craft allegedly crashed out in the New Mexico desert. There really is waves of this in the 40s, early 40s, early 50s, some in the 60s and 70s, and for sure in the 80s. And Tompkins was among the individuals who were approached by the Galactics to try to gather this information and spread it out to humanity.
Right. For the people who want to do a little research, and I suggest you do, it's because there's so much information coming to the fore, that you would want to get a book by Tompkins. He has a 3-volume book called Selected by the Extraterrestrials. You got to read it. I mean, it'll blow your mind. But anyway, because he has so much information, he just left us a couple of years ago at 94. So you can imagine the last 60 years of his life, 70 years, he collected so much information. Let's talk about Billy Meyer. What do you think his responsibilities were and are? He's still around, so I understand. Let's talk about him.
Meyer is a Swiss citizen. He's a farmer by trade. He had lost one of his arms in an accident. He's a one-armed Swiss farmer. He was contacted early in the 1940s, 1942, but it was later on that he had a series of additional contacts. The 1942 contact lasted until 1953, and then the contact shifted from a being called Sephoth to a being called Asket, and that contact lasted from 1953 to 1964 approximately. But it was later on that he was able to take some of the clearest and most intriguing and perhaps controversial photos and films ever taken of extraterrestrial spacecraft. And it was in the 70s where he really blew up and people began to notice him, mostly for his photos. But it was the information that he was given that is the most compelling in hundreds of pages, hundreds and hundreds of pages. He was a world traveler. He was in the French Foreign Legion. He did a lot of research himself, and his contact story is the most incredible story probably out there, with maybe just a few exceptions.
What kind of information was he trying to share with us? Because that's very important.
It is very important. And here's what's interesting. Again, as I said before, the information I was given, the information Van Tassel was given, and others, including Tatiana Mishukina in Russia, Barbara Marciniak, and of course, Edward Meyer, Billy Meyer, is a message of urgent plea from the Galactics for us to stop experimenting with nuclear weapons, to move away from a culture of war, and to work more on taking care of the planet, taking care of ourselves. The Palladians are incredibly concerned about our weapons, about our warfare, about our industrialization, which harms the planet, and really a culture of harm of one against another. And their message is a message of peace, a message of unity, and a message of how important it is for us to grow as individuals spiritually.
Yeah. Now, Van Tassel came along around 1950, 51, 52, somewhere in that vicinity. And I remember reading a lot about him. He also was a member, he went to the White House and talked to President Eisenhower. And then he used to hold seminars. Somewhere 10,000, 11,000 people showed up. But talk about him and what was his duty and responsibility to be contacted, and what information did he want us to understand that for us to grow and develop with?
In the late 1940s, George Van Tassel lived in Los Angeles and was an aircraft mechanic and an aviation engineer. He became friends with Howard Hughes and worked for Hughes Aircraft for a long period of time. Eventually, in the late 40s, he moved out to an area near Joshua Tree to Giant Rock, which is claimed to be the largest freestanding boulder in the Northern Hemisphere, and a sacred site for the Native Americans. He set up a cafe, an airstrip, a home, of course, a ranch, and some other things out there. several years after he was moved into Giant Rock, he was contacted by a being from Venus named Solgonda, and the Venusians contacted him, and ultimately later on became contact with the Ashtar Command, same as Tesla's contact with the Venusians and others. Meyer, same thing, people from the Pleiades, Ashtar and whatnot. So when they came to him with a message of that they wanted him to construct a rejuvenation machine, which he did and nearly finished, called the Integratron.
Wow. He did not finish that. Why? What happened toward the end?
He did not finish it because sadly he died in 1978 when he was very near the end of the completion of the project at the age of, I believe he was about 67 years old, pretty young guy for a heart attack, supposedly. He died under very mysterious circumstances. All the equipment and paperwork that was at his location, which he was in LA when he passed away, Santa Ana, a couple hours away in the desert, all of that was retrieved, just like Tesla, by, I guess black vans drove up and took all of his gear, all of his paperwork. The Integratron still exists, but the people that own it now and even the people nearby that worked with him don't completely understand exactly what needs to happen to make it work, but all the equipment's gone.
Well, it sounds like it was something. The med bed is coming down the pike here, and the galactic chamber. Could do you think is analogous to what he was trying to do?
I shared with you a couple weeks ago a movie called Elysium with Matt Damon and Jodie Foster, which is a great movie, which has med beds as a very important part of its story. The med bed is an elusive thing. I mean, it's Star Trek technology, and many people in the conspiracy space claim that it's out there, and it's been out there for a long time. Tesla's work and ultimately Van Tassel's work, which is a rejuvenation machine, he wanted people to become younger. He believed that we didn't have enough time on the earth with 70 or 80 or 90 or 100 years to accomplish what we need to accomplish. We needed longer lifespans, and that's what he was working on.
Yeah, that's excellent. But let's talk about Tesla just a wee bit, because he's in there somewhere. Tesla left here around 1940, 42, 40, somewhere around in there. But let's talk about who he was and what kind of contribution did he leave the world for those people who never heard of Tesla as a person.
Nikola Tesla, and not Elon Musk Tesla, was a really important figure, and it was really his work that inspired Van Tassel. And Van Tassel was very clear about this, that he was inspired by Tesla's work. There's a lot of similarities between them. Nikola Tesla and George Van Tassel share an intriguing connection through their reported contact with beings from Venus and their interest in advanced unconventional technologies. They both claim to have had contact with beings from Venus and Ashtar. They both worked on unique technologies. Tesla's innovations included wireless electricity, alternating current, and experiment with electromagnetic fields and wireless transmission of information. Van Tassel's Integratron was a combination of advanced alien technology and Tesla's principles. These two both were influenced by otherworldly energies and information, and in both cases, their knowledge was ultimately suppressed.
Right. Tesla had bumped heads with Andrew Carnegie and J.P. Morgan and Rockefeller back in the turn of the century of 1910 and 1920, somewhere around. What was the conflict about, and what happened to his inventions when he left?
I'll date myself here by saying that there was a hard rock band in the 80s called Tesla, and they had a song called, I think in the early 90s, called Edison's Medicine, which described the conflict between Edison and Tesla. And unfortunately for Nikola Tesla, as a Croatian immigrant who was not a hardcore businessman, he really was a soft-spoken intellect and an inventor and a pioneer. He was really swayed by the funding and the money that he could get, and his money was repeatedly cut off, and he found himself in the middle of a really big battle between sort of industrial giants, captains of industry, and it was Edison that ultimately prevailed in terms of the technology, even though we use alternating current every single day in our homes, and that is Tesla technology. But it's interesting that Elon Musk called his company Tesla, but he uses Edison technology, which is direct current technology, in his vehicles. But yeah, Tesla unfortunately just was at the wrong end of too much of a cabal of powerful industrialists.
I understand because Tesla had invented what, tell us what he specifically invented that and he wanted us to have free access to that information. But the cabal says no. If we can't make any money, we don't want to let them have that. Could we talk about that a bit?
Sure, probably he had over 300 patents to his name, but really the technology that was the breakthrough technology that people still talk about today is the wireless transmission of electricity.
Okay.
And so if anyone like me lives in Southern California, you know that many of the wildfires out here are started by power lines that are blown down by high winds, and the power lines, wooden poles break and they get on the ground and they start fires. And communities spend millions, perhaps tens of millions of dollars to ultimately convert their power lines from above ground poles to bury them down below. Like when you go to a nice, suburban neighborhood in California, the power lines are buried. Our entire electrical infrastructure would go away. And so you've got, a multi-billion, maybe trillion-dollar industry globally of wired cables that people use to transmit electricity, which would go away and would be replaced. Unfortunately, even if everybody on the world tomorrow decided that they wanted to shift to Tesla technology, to his wireless electricity transmission, it would be a complete disruption and an upheaval of how we do things, and would take years to do. We should do that, and that's an important thing, but it's just totally incompatible with how we do things today.
When the FBI, CIA, and the like, when he passed in 1942 in New York at some hotel, they came in and took everything he had. Who did they turn all that information over to?
It's interesting that you mentioned that because the person that was really in charge of the on-the-ground activity was John G. Trump, uncle to Donald Trump. John G. Trump worked for Vannevar Bush. Vannevar Bush was the head of the Rad Lab, and Vannevar Bush was a member of Majestic 12. What's interesting is you can see that one of my favorite people to watch on YouTube is dark journalist Daniel List. His concept called the UFO file, this sort of nuclear football that gets passed around but from administration to administration. The UFO file represents everything that we know currently about that. And as that file moves around and as different people have access to it, that's where the center of power tends to move in our government.
Look. So Trump got all that information. John G. Trump. He was at MIT? Was he a professor of MIT? Is that where he was?
That's correct, with Vannevar Bush.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. Right. So the Majestic 12. That's real. Truman put that together in 1947 as a result of that Roswell crash to hide that information. Let's talk about that for people so they can catch up to speed. And you might reference them to some books, some tapes. I know you have a website, Comic Scrolls. Let's talk about some of that so people can do their homework.
Yeah, the 1940s, late 1940s and early 1950s. I hate to talk about dusty, old, ancient information here for our younger listeners. Really is where this all happens. And all these projects that people have heard about, like Project Saucer, Project Sign, Grudge, Gleam, the Robertson Panel, Blue Book, Project Sage, Project Rainbow, Project Red Light, Project Snowbird, all happened in the 50s. And so the crash at Roswell really forced the world powers to sort of move into action. They understood what was going on with this back to the wave of British UFO sightings starting in 1940, the Battle of Los Angeles in 42, the Great British UFO Scare of 42, the Foo Fighters of 44, the Swedish Ghost Rockets of 46. They knew about this stuff, but it was that crash and the fact that they kind of admitted it, probably inadvertently, in that infamous newspaper article with the gentleman holding up the tinfoil or whatever it was. It forced them to move into action and to develop a series of plans, executive orders, and everything else that culminated in the security state that we have today. The CIA and the NSA exist only because of UFOs. The alien presence was the genesis for the creation of both of those intelligence agencies. Now, they morphed out of things from World War II, but most of the apparatus of our security state today is really focused on the alien presence and not really on international relations.
Okay, but coming up to speed, coming up to the, I'm glad we talked about that because everything has a fundamental foundation. And certainly, historically, that's so important for people to understand that all of this information is 100 years old or more. And now, the current people in the Pentagon are talking about some hearings, congressional hearings on UAPs, as they call them, or UFOs. And so that's going to be more and more coming to the fore. But prior to now, most of that information has been held down. So you go to NBC, CBS, ABC, CNN, it's not there. So history is important for us to know what's going on. The people who have been holding this close to their chests, let's talk about the Robinson report, and let's talk about the Brookings information that's been held back, and why did they put that out there, and what does that say in essence about not disclosing this to the people?
Sure. Yeah, that's an important point. The Robertson panel was convened or led by physicist Howard P. Robertson in 1953 and was convened by the CIA to assess the growing public and military concerns about UFO sightings. They ultimately decided not to pursue the truth about UFOs, but to really just quell public anxiety and skepticism. They recommended a public relations campaign to debunk UFO sightings, dissuade independent research, and minimize the topic in mainstream media. 7 years later, the Brookings, what I call the Jason Report, came out in 1960. It was called Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs, sort of a mouthful. They were really worried and they were paranoid, and they really, at this point, switched into a real overdrive as far as trying to suppress and really manage and control this information. They realized that they couldn't put the genie back in the bottle, but what they could do is control the meaning and control the purpose of their activities and control the story about extraterrestrials. The extraterrestrials themselves, who were present and active at this time, were very frustrated with this, and they expressed that in a lot of different writings, that they felt like the world governments were blaming them for things they didn't do, saying that they were going to do things that they weren't planning to do, painting them as a menace and an invasion force, which they weren't. And so this topic really shifted in 1950, the whole of the 50s, from a story about curious encounters with otherworldly beings to really the alien threat story, the UFO threat, which is this idea that they're here to kill us and do terrible things to us. That's where it shifted. And the government, namely the CIA, controlled that narrative, and they've shaped it ever since.
Yeah. What part did the establishment of NSA put together by Truman in I think 1952 or so play in terms of quelling this information being on television, on CBS or ABC or NBC? What part did that the Majestic 12 play?
The NSA was created specifically to deal with the alien question, the alien threat, for no other reason. And all of these intelligence agencies, we've been told, were part of a reaction to the Cold War, dealing with issues that came out of World War II, preparing ourselves for future geopolitical things. Intelligence agencies, we're told, are specifically to understand what foreign threats are and how to deal with geopolitics. That is 100% untrue. And the Galactus have confirmed this again and again through disclosure of information through their sources, that the NSA and the CIA are here to manage the UFO story. That's it.
Okay, good. We got 3 minutes left. Look, there's a lot of information, book. What would, for people who want to follow up and do research, Project Blue Book, Project Grudge, whatever, where would you tell them to go? Dr. Greer, does he have sufficient information for them, for people?
I think Dr. Greer has great information. If you go to Dr. Stephen Greer's website, if you're interested in disclosure from whistleblowers, from people who are experts behind the scenes, who have things to say about this, Greer's a great place to go. If you're interested in the message that's coming from the intelligent extraterrestrials that are here to try to teach us something, I recommend looking into Van Tassel and Meyer. There's lots of great documentaries about Meyer. Some of them are very critical of him, and that's fine. There's a great movie or documentary on Amazon Prime called Calling All Earthlings. I've seen it several times, and it's about Van Tassel. I encourage people to look and see what the aliens have to say, in addition to looking at what the government claims that they are doing or not doing.
Okay, well, I think we've got to wrap it up. Look, it's it's a lot of information we covered. We could go on and on and on. Maybe next time we would talk about the fact that there's a light side and there's a dark side. There's a good and there's a evil, right? There's a benevolent and there's a benevolent, malevolent, if you will. So we will get into that because people. All right, no, I'll leave it alone. Thank you very much for being on the show. Thank you, Norman, for educating us as to what's going on planet Earth. And so I'll see you next time. And thanks very much for listening to lightsofthenight.org.
Introducing Pure Light, the revolutionary air purification system integrated into a special LED light bulb. Pure Light eliminates pet odors, human odors, and even mold and smoke odors with just the flip of a light switch. Guaranteed for 5 years with a 100% money-back guarantee. Transform your home or office today. Visit pure-light.com and use code RUSS, R-U-S-S, for an exclusive 20% discount. Breathe cleaner, live happier with Pure Light. pure-light.com. Promo code RUSS, R-U-S-S.
Thank you for joining us on Lights in the Night. Keep your eyes on the skies and stay curious. Until next time, good night.